Good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining us. And so moving to this new Teams model is all of a sudden you're all magically in very quickly. So we're just letting everyone in through the waiting room as it happens. So just give us a couple of seconds. And then we will get cracking on the seminar today. All right, so there's still people floating in, but we will get started for today. So thank you for joining us for the next in our webinar series here with Jonge. So we're very excited to be it's our last one for the financial year. I think if anything is no truer word is that all of you are quite exhausted from leading into financial year. So it's no doubt this has been a fairly busy period, and I think with part of the topic today around the budget, no doubt you've had even more questions than you normally have had. So couple of housekeeping things. We are on a new platform, as you're probably aware, being Teams. So if you do have any questions for me, please unmute yourself. Unmute yourself and then just speak over the top of me, or you can write into the chat app. There's also a Q&A area, which I'll try and keep an eye on as well. So many of ways to try and communicate through today. So more than happy. I'm happy for it to be interactive. So please jump in if there is anything you want to ask about that we're talking about through this morning. So before I jump into a little bit of the budget stuff, I'll just give a little bit of an update, I guess, on what we're seeing from an insolvency perspective and what some of the stats are talking about around the place at the moment. So it's pretty common knowledge now that last year was a record insolvency year. So the 2025 year was a record year at over 14,700 insolvencies. For the 10 months to the end of April, so for 2026, we're currently sitting at 11,700. Now it's obviously 2 more months, and I certainly the feeling that I would have for May and June would be we'll be very, very close to matching last year. What's interesting though is the change in mix of that insolvency from last year to this year. What we've seen is that there is a 25% increase in court liquidations, 25% increase in 16% increase in receiverships, and that SBRs are down by a staggering 38%. Now I've spoken previously on here about why SBRs have dropped off so majorly, but as a very quick rehash, small business restructures have really dropped off now because the ATO have tightened the criteria of what they're willing to accept and who they're willing to accept to vote for. So we're seeing a lot more rejections, and once those rejections start kicking through, people know that it's not now worth doing it. So we're certainly seeing a staggering drop off in the SBRs, and it will probably find its new normal because, as I've always said, it is actually a really good product and a really good tool to be used for the right people. So it's a matter of actually, and for the right businesses, it's just a matter of learning how to use it properly and not what we had in 2024-25, where the government said, just get everyone through so they start using it. What it means, though, is that there's a real change in the market of what's driving activity in the insolvency space. So with court appointments up, that's a creditor-driven activity. Receiverships are creditor-driven activity. And now the director-driven activity, where it's the creditor voluntary liquidations and the SBRs and some voluntary administration and dockers and deed of company arrangements, they've pared back a little bit. So it's not so much about the directors driving activity at the moment. We're seeing a real increase in creditors pushing for activity. And I think that's coming from a base where we've got a lot more creditors who are wanting to get their money. Creditor days have driven out dramatically. In the latest reports, they're going out another 10 or 15 days now. So it's getting harder to get paid by a business. So therefore, that's driving activity to chase and get people to pay you quicker through using a lot more of the insolvency methods from a creditor point of view. The other big thing is in the press, we've had a lot of people talking about the construction and accommodation, food and accommodation are the two peak industries that are in distress. What we're finding in 2026 is that construction is down by 3%. Food and accommodation is actually down by 14% in terms of insolvencies. And real estate has also dropped. I've spoken many a time about how insolvencies have been really, real estate has really been impacted by the insolvency market in the last 12 months. Those three areas are now down. What we're seeing though is the increase is that mining is up by nearly 30%, retail is up by nearly 20%, arts and recreation are up 14%, and transport is up 13%. So what we're finding is that the stress is now being mitigated from the early cycle shock sectors, so the ones that are affected by margins pretty much instantly when something changes, through to the demand sensitive and trade exposed ones now. So all we've seen is that even though the numbers are quite stagnant, the markets that are being affected are changing quite dramatically. And we'll talk some more about that and how we can deal with that as we go through. A couple of other things of interest as it plays out is that New South Wales and Victoria being the two biggest markets by volume of appointments, they are down year on year, marginally, but they're down. New South Wales is about 6%, Victoria is down by 3%. But the smaller, Queensland and the smaller jurisdictions are still climbing. So where the real shock is hitting is still in those smaller markets. Some of them are coming off a very low base, obviously, so it can appear quite dramatic. But we are still seeing that those smaller markets are the ones that are really being impacted at the moment rather than the bigger ones. And that's partly because construction and the accommodation and food businesses are obviously centered around those larger markets, and there's a lot more of them there. So now that they're starting to come off, that's changing where the impacts are. Probably one of the big things, though, that I wanted to talk to you all about from an insolvency perspective is a really interesting stat around small business, when we talk small businesses, but not all of these stats are focused off ASIC. So they're coming off the company base or their trusts that have got corporate trustees, and that's all coming from the ASIC database. Where we're seeing a really interesting trend is that 30% of all businesses in Australia are still run under a sole trader structure. What's really intriguing, though, is that 54% of the tax default that is happening in the country under the new rules that the ATO have got, which are for debts over $100,000 that are more than 90 days old, 54% are actually sole traders that are being marked with the credit defaults. So there is a real undercurrent when you consider that 30% of all businesses, and therefore 30% of the clients that we're dealing with, have got businesses, a large chunk of their businesses are going to be sole traders, and they're the biggest market for financial distress at the moment. None of that actually hits the reporting data that most of you are seeing. Now, there is a little bit that comes out through AFCA, which is, the Australian Financial Services Authority, the bankruptcy trustees. There, we're seeing an increase. We're seeing some numbers, and certainly the bankruptcy rates are going up, and largely because of business debt. That's going to be a combination of two things. One is all of the director penalty notices that are expired, but the other is that we've got this large supply of businesses that are in default that are sole traders. So when you're looking at clients and trying to work out how to move them through and how to protect them, please make sure you actually have a look at some of their mix of their client base. If they've got a really high sole trader client base, that would actually make them probably a higher risk business than someone that's 90% business to business. And sorry, corporate structure to corporate structure. So B2B obviously can still be a sole trader, but if the credit mix or their debtor mix is really high for sole traders, that probably puts them at a much higher risk basis from a client that's trying to work their way through, and it might be something that they need to work through over time. So although we've got this a little bit of a rotation happening at the moment from director-led insolvency to creditor-led insolvency, I think we still need to be mindful that we've still got a long way to go in terms of how we move through this. And if we look at two of the lead indicators, we've got the credit default days, how long it takes for a debtor to be paid, and we look at and just these default rates. What we're seeing is that I think that a lot of that was starting to increase before we had the Strait of Hormuz issues and all of that energy spike issues. So those started before then. The energy crisis is certainly going to exacerbate it further. So I think we're still in for a fairly long tail in terms of dealing with this. And also I think it's important to think about where that, reading the headline that insolvencies are stabilised just means that all we're doing is it's a change in which mix of the market we're now having to deal with. So just a couple of things for everyone to keep in mind. And I think we've still got a long way to go in terms of dealing with businesses that are in distress and how we need to look at them, what we need to do. What I did want to highlight and what we wanted to talk about a little bit today was, I guess, a slightly different take on what we need to worry about from the budget. Now, I've been trying to write my notes in regard to what we talk about today, and it's obviously changing every 5 minutes. And even as late as yesterday, there was a new deal done with the Greens to remove borrowing for self-managed super funds for residential property. One thing I want to be clear on is that I'm not a tax or a legal expert, so I'm not wanting to give a commentary on how it works, why it works, or when it works. You guys are the specialists at all of that. I just want to sort of try and highlight from our perspective how that impact might flow through to where you can, one, use Jonge to assist you in dealing with it, but more importantly, just give a different view without certainly trying to give advice on how to structure it. And probably the big one that I want to talk about is around the trust tax. Now, I know it's been watered down and we've got rid of testamentary trusts, which I think is phenomenal. It's the testamentary trust is a tool that we use quite regularly, or we advise quite regularly for people who have got financial debt issues. And may need to look at, personal insolvency, or they are the children of someone. I've got a client at the moment in a regional town. He's got himself as a sole trader into quite a lot of trouble. He's got a couple of $100,000 worth of debt that he needs to deal with. And because he's a sole trader, what we need to look at is personal insolvency measures, so a Part 10 or a bankruptcy. One of the issues and one of the discussion points that our strategist had when we talk with that client is actually around, is there a likelihood that you're going to get an inheritance? Now, unfortunately for this guy in this circumstance, mum is actually really unwell. His father passed away about 12 months ago, and mum looks like, regrettably, she's on a fairly short time frame herself. So we need to, before we can address any insolvency strategy, we need to address mum's financial situation and potentially try and talk to her and her advisors about the use of a testamentary trust. So by getting everything structured in a testamentary trust the right way, we then know that he is safe, that he can go into bankruptcy, and those assets, mum's assets, are protected if she does pass during his 3 years of bankruptcy. It's a whole other talk, and I'm happy to talk about that if anyone has any questions, but just wanted to highlight, certainly I was very happy to hear that they removed it, even just from our point of view and the benefit that it has for us from the on the insolvency side. But if we have a look at the 30% minimum tax on trusts, and again, I'm not giving advice on whether we need to move or what we need to do, but Treasury estimates say that there are about 350,000 active small businesses that are operating through trust structures. Of that, Treasury is saying that there is about 140 of them that distribute more than $380,000 worth of income per year. Now, if you're above 380 when you just look at a standard trust of mum and dad, that puts it above any benefit. The tax rate is above the 30 cents in the dollar. So that's one of the key numbers that they talk about. What that means, though, is that if you believe Treasury, and there's a lot of reasons not to believe their estimates, because I think they're very much guesstimates more than estimates. There are over 200,000 trusts that potentially would fall into the category that would need to think about restructuring, because the tax impost of staying in the trust structure now become quite high. So again, not talking about whether, I don't want to give the advice around what things you need to think about for whether you want to restructure or not. What I want to talk to you about is that if you decide, for the benefit of your client, that restructuring is necessary to get out of the trust now, for whatever reasons, whether it tax or trusts still are a very powerful tool for protecting an asset. But if there is predominantly a purpose more around tax planning and tax minimisation, which is obviously what the government's targeting, and you now want to think about moving to a corporate structure and move away from the trust structure, that's where I think where I wanted to really be clear about the fact that you need to do that very carefully. Now, when I look at it from our point of view, from an insolvency point of view, many a time we've spoken about clients in the past who were sole traders who had tried to move into a trust or a company structure, and about moving that business needs to be done properly. So it's about getting plant and equipment valuations, getting goodwill valuations, doing a sale agreement, moving the business across, and making sure that that business is paid for going back the other way. But more importantly than that, or as importantly as that, is making sure that all the supply accounts are moved as well. So, I use the example all the time about Bunnings, for instance. If you've got a Bunnings account, that's got a caveatable interest clause in it. So if you're moving from a trust structure to a corporate structure, you want to get a new supplier account in the corporate, because otherwise, anything that you leave behind, or you've got a private trust, you've got an individual trustee, you're still leaving exposure in the old structure. Because a lot of these, let's face it, are going to be solvent restructures. We're not necessarily going to need to liquidate the trusts behind this restructure, because these are good businesses that you're just trying to get a better business structure for. Based on the current tax environment. So we're not necessarily going to do a liquidation at the end, which would cut off a lot of these trade accounts. But what happens is, when you move something corporately for the purposes of tax, and you get new tax file numbers and you start operating through that, we need to make sure the directors do all of the bits that move everything across properly. So bringing staff across the right way, bringing them in under new tax declarations, bringing across their employment and employee entitlements. Whether we want to bring them across, it can be an opportunity to leave some staff behind if you need the right size, and we all know just how much fun it is to try and deal with staff in a corporate structure, and actually needing to terminate some. And we certainly over the years have had many businesses come to us talking about, I've got all these staff, I need to downsize, but I can't afford to get rid of them because they've got 30 years of entitlements or 20 years of entitlements. Using insolvency as a tool, there are ways that we can manage that to a certain extent. So really importantly, it's if the decision is made by whether it's lawyers or the accountants or a combination of both, that because of this tax, and there may be other reasons as well, but because of this tax, if for the purposes of today, if we look at this tax, it's really important that if you make the decision to restructure, that the restructure is done completely and fully, so that we make sure that you bring all the supply accounts across, you bring your employees across, customer accounts need to be redone. So all of those things need to be brought across and done properly, and it's quite a complex process to bring a business across from one entity to another in a way that will hold up later. So now there are some other benefits around the valuation of the business from old entity to new entity, and the timing of doing that with these new laws coming in, with the changes to the CGT legislation, and using the various small business rollover reliefs and all of those timing issues and what tax is left when you bring a profitable business across. There are a number of different strategies that can be employed if you're starting to think about doing that sort of stuff. So I highly recommend that if you are looking to do that with any client over this next period of time, after the Royal Assent kicks in and all of these things start playing, it's a really good time to involve Jonge to talk about how you can work with your clients to use insolvency to better affect any change that you feel is necessary along the way. I hope that makes a little bit of sense. The combination of using the CGT stuff in a transition, as well as making sure that we actually transition the business properly. And while we're transitioning, it's potentially a good time to clean the slate on a number of things. So if there is a small tax debt, we can look at how we manage that. If there are some finances that you're not particularly comfortable with, if directors got director loans, how we move those across and secure them properly in the new entity. So there's a lot of positives that can come on top of the decision that you need to restructure to deal with this change in legislation from a tax point of view or budget point of view. It will help create an opportunity now to clean up a lot of other legacy issues to make sure that you are setting the client up with a much better protection strategy, as well as all of the other things that you do around your compliance strategies and your tax minimisation strategies and all the rest of it. So I think for clients that you flag as someone that you need to make a change, I want you to feel really comfortable, please, to reach out, give me or any of our strategist team a call, and we can talk through a lot of solvent restructure stuff that is available and that can be done to help. And I want to be clear that using insolvency can be a tool, but it doesn't mean we're going to need to use it in all cases in these scenarios. I'm working with a client at the moment. This isn't directly related to the capital gains, but we're working with a client at the moment who is selling a major asset that was in a company and trust structure. They've sold the asset, they've dealt with some distribution, and they're looking to do the distributions, and we're actually assisting in using a members voluntary liquidation, so a solvent liquidation, to help distribute those remaining assets at a better tax value than they would have if they just left it in the company and trust structure. So There are some benefits to using solvent liquidations, which is the members' voluntary liquidations. So again, please feel free to talk to us about any of those things as and when you need to look at them. So that's probably the big one, I guess, that I wanted to talk about with the small business and capital gains, all those CGT, all of those rollover changes. Obviously, the CGT rollover is moved from 2 million to 10 million as part of this concessional deal they did. Just to try and not look like as big a liars as they were. Sorry, we're not allowed to use that word, are we? I'm actually not trying to be political. I just think it's, the way the system works can be a bit frustrating at times. But if you're looking to do any type of reset because of any of these changes, then there may be an opportunity to use insolvency as a tool to get you through that change, even better than you would otherwise have thought. So please talk to us about that. As part of that, and I guess going back to my initial point about this changing market of where the insolvencies are rolling to, and something that I've seen particularly in Victoria, we're actually seeing it across the country, but obviously with me based down here, we see a bit more of it directly, is that we've now, with these next round of businesses that are starting to face more insolvency pressure, the other thing that's become quite a big talking point is around safe harbour protection. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about that again, because I know a lot of our referrers and some of you here online particularly have been talking to me about it, is that you're working with clients to help them try and find a way through. So they're not completely underwater. They're not dead in the water in any way, shape or form, but they are really, really worried about where things are going to go. So you're working with them either to restructure finances, you're looking at them at just trying to deal with margins and how you move things forward. But when you do that, if you have any of those conversations, there should also be a conversation about safe harbour protection and ensuring that the directors, if, again, we've got, in my opinion, we've got a lot of pressures. They're going to make it very difficult for a business that's been working for the last 3 years on small margins and tight margins to get back into a really strong, profitable position, because there's so many factors working against any small business at the moment. And the ATO hasn't helped us at all, the government hasn't helped at all with some of these new tax changes. So if you're looking at working through a restructure, having your directors have that safe harbour protection can be a really critical thing to do. Now, I'll be frank, if they actually survive and get out the other side, it was an insurance policy they didn't need. If they become profitable and everything's cracking along and they're all making good money in 18 months, then having the safe harbour is an insurance policy that we didn't need. Just like we pay for insurance on our house, and then we don't sit there and go, oh, my house didn't catch on fire this year. That's a shame because I didn't get to use my insurance policy. That's what safe harbour is really like for a business. However, if we get it wrong and the turnaround doesn't work for whatever reason, and it's not necessarily the director's fault, as I say, we've got a number of businesses now that the reason why they're talking to us is because their customers are falling over. They were strong and kept their margins wide and kept their client base spread. But if you lose, 2 or 3 of your major clients, that can have a significant impact on a business moving forward. So if you are working through any of those turnaround strategies with a client at the moment and working on it month by month, having a safe harbour protection in place is really critical. What it does is if the business fails in the future, if you've got appropriate protection in place through a safe harbour model, then the director is protected from insolvent trading. Now, when businesses go down, the one thing I do know after nearly 20 years of us being in business is that when something falls over, all of a sudden, the director's personal assets are very much in line of what they want to protect. Now, I say that because when you talk to them today, when you're talking to them about turning around, they don't think that those are at risk because they're confident that the business is going to survive. But when it doesn't and things don't work out right, all of a sudden they become the big thing that, hey, I just want to save my home. Now, if you've encouraged the director and they've worked through having safe harbour protection in place, that's something that you can sleep better knowing for the director and any of the advisors, knowing that, hey, you put that protection in place to protect against those assets later. How it works is really simple. Just in a really high level, if we're engaged to assist, we need to, as a safe harbour practitioner, provide a review that has a look at the plan that you and the client and potentially us get involved in developing to turn the business around over a 12 or 18-month period, or how to make it better and more profitable so that we've got less risk of insolvent trading and all those other things. We need to make a comparison between that plan and what would happen if you liquidated today. As long as the plan is better than liquidation today, then you move forward with the safe harbour protection. There are regular reviews where Jonge, the advisors involved in the turnaround and the directors meet, review what we're doing against the KPIs of the business or the key indicators of the turnaround plan. And as long as those things continue in the right direction, then we tick off that we're still on track. If for whatever reason the turnaround plan says, oh, it'll be good because we'll get this contract in 2 months' time that we're bidding for, and with that contract in the turnaround plan, everything's going to be great. But let's say in 2 months' time, you don't get that contract for whatever reason, then there is a checkpoint in the safe harbour plan where we go, okay, that was a critical part of the plan. Do we have a new updated strategy now that we haven't got that? How do we actually maintain returning to higher profitability? If we do that, we can tick another box and we continue with the safe harbour protection. If that loss is too great or the loss of that contract means that, hey, no, we just need to put our hands in the air and shut down the business, then you protect it up to that point. So that's what safe harbour is in a nutshell. There's some complexity around it, like everything, but we're doing quite a number of these across the country at the moment, and we're getting a lot more inquiry for it now that people are understanding the value of having that protection, particularly in such an environment where things are so dynamic at the moment and so crazy high risk, I guess, to be in business in any type of sector. And as I say, with those increasing sectors like retail, manufacturing, transport, they're trying to get through this period with the higher energy prices, the interest rates and higher defaults. They're all pressures that they're just trying to get through until we can get to whatever the next crisis is that we need to deal with, or maybe if we're lucky, we can stop being punch drunk and we won't have a crisis for a while, and we'll just have a good growth period in the economy. If we have that, we're trying to get to that point. This is where having the CGT in place and having safe harbour in place can help drive that business forward. And so it's a discussion worth having. And while you're talking with any of your clients, if someone goes, oh, we need to try and work through this over the next 12 months, that should be a flag to think about moving through a restructured plan and working through having a safe harbour plan in place. So the beauty of it is that it's one of those things that there are a lot of businesses at the moment who are not quite ready to give up. They are getting tired. We're seeing a lot more businesses are getting tired of the fight, but they're not quite ready yet to give up. But they can see if a couple of things don't go their way, that we are going to need to do something more drastic. So what do you do in that interim period? And that's where Safe Harbour can be a really powerful tool. It also gives us, as the advisor, an opportunity to look at how we can put some personal asset protection in place 12 months out, or 12 months out or less or more from a potential insolvency event, to ensure that that's not the end of the line. So, we can look at the personal asset structures, we can look at the houses, we can look at where the cars are. Again, I'm sure most of you online here would have had the point where, the car, the wife's or the husband's car is in the business. You're now in some strife. So you talk about wanting but I need to protect the car. I need to move that out because it's really not part of the business, but we've just put it in there because that's where the finance was. Well, we've got time to do that in protection now, and get that ready and safe rather than having to do everything in a rush. So there are some real significant opportunities available on that front as well, even if the Safe Harbour is something that's outside the scope. Or at the same time. So that's probably a couple of critical things I wanted to talk about in terms of what to look for moving forward. It'll be a slightly shorter one again today. So please, if you've got any questions or you've got any comments, please feel free to jump in while I'm just working through this next little bit. I think I'm stating the obvious when I say this, but it's amazing how many times it still needs to be repeated. Looking at the tax position at the moment is a really critical thing for a client, and trying to have that early conversation about what are we going to do if we can't pay it back. We're seeing a lot of clients at the moment that are just drip feeding the ATO who aren't on formal payment plans. They should be talking to someone about options. Director penalty notices are certainly, I guess the director penalty notice is a final warning. It's not the first warning. So we want to be trying to get ahead of any of those areas. I think, most of you obviously have been dealing with a lot at the moment with people who are needing to go to single touch payroll. There's no doubt that's going to have an impact on cash flow. One of the good things about it is that there's probably meaning that we're going to have a lot less businesses that have got super debts when they come to us, which opens up some opportunities to assist and help businesses more if they don't have outstanding super. But we do know it's going to put some significant pressure on cash flow for a lot of businesses. And come 1 July, we're going to have the increase in the minimum wage. We know in a lot of these sectors that I'm talking about as being the next wave of the insolvency, minimum wages and the impact of wages and payday super are going to have a significant impact on their cash flows. So getting in early on those conversations when they can't pay that next BAS, which is due in July, it's time to have a conversation about what we need to do, whether it be a Safe Harbour plan, whether it be a restructure plan, a good SBR plan, or a pre-pack or anything like that. It's time to do it earlier rather than later, especially now that we're seeing that increase in creditor-driven activity. At the moment, I know in my office alone, we've got 4 clients that we're working up against a wind-up order because the client kept their head in the sand too long. And I know that's not always your fault because you'll tell a client to turn up and they won't call. But we're working through 4 that we're up against wind-up orders. Now, there actually is a legitimately good business in behind it, but they just couldn't deal with some of the legacy debt over the last few years. So trying to get a restructure done up against the barrel of a wind-up is a lot more complex and generally more expensive, both from what we need to do and from the other providers that we need to get involved. So getting in early and talking about that is really critical. Certainly, we're seeing a lot more people getting early advice. And again, we're more than happy to develop and come up with a plan B option for your clients that they may not need today, but they may need a little bit later. So please reach out and talk to us about that. And be mindful of this changing sector. You know, when you talk to your clients, they go, "Oh no, construction's, they're the ones in trouble. I'm okay." There is definitely a moving of the sector of who's safe and who's not. And I think the reality is that no sector is going to be safe as we move our way through things. So the wave of insolvency that I think everyone's talking about is settling down and not going anywhere. Please be mindful that it hasn't gone away. It hasn't changed. What it is that the dynamics within the wave are now moving around. We're now moving from this sector to the next sector, and then new ones will come through as those demands kick into play for the different businesses. So that's primarily what I wanted to cover today. Certainly, as we're looking at understanding the budget for the next 12 months and the impacts of that as it achieves royal assent in the coming months, and you start having decisions and discussions around doing that restructure, please keep us in mind. I think there are some critical add-ons that we can add to help in doing a restructure if it's advised or if it's needed done correctly. And certainly our 20 years of experience in managing a restructure of a business will certainly add some valuable insight into ensuring that it's done well for the future. So that was all I wanted to cover. Please feel free if you've got any questions now to jump in and have a say your Pete. And otherwise, I think I'll hand back to Stella to put our poll up. And we'll wait for any late questions if they come. Let me have a look at Q&A. Nothing in there. Our chat's quiet. You're being very quiet today. I'm sure you're all madly doing work behind the scenes and listening to my dulcet tones in the background. Thank you. Thank you, Kylie. I always appreciate that. The poll's up. So please do that. Again, there's opportunities there for any new discussions, anything you'd like to cover off on. More than happy to do that. Thanks, Diane. Always a pleasure to have everyone along. So enjoying the chat. It'd be much better if someone actually wanted to have a chat back. I think it's very one-sided. But I do appreciate everyone joining us. Hopefully there's something in there for everyone. I think certainly doing the research today, really looking at where the changing pressures are in the insolvency it was actually really interesting when you look at the detail of that. I think we hear so much about hospitality and we hear so much about construction, we forget that there are a lot of other industries that are hurting. All right, well, thank you all. Have a wonderful Wednesday. We will be moving back to our normal Thursday slot from now on. So I appreciate those who have altered from our Wednesday slot. And we look forward to going back to our standard Thursday time slot next month, and then hopefully the rest of the year. Everybody have a wonderful afternoon, and appreciate you all attending this really busy time of year. And for those I don't speak to before next Tuesday, happy financial year. Happy new financial year.